When we last met, we discussed the nature of sovereignty up to the mid-20th century, and that was the pluralist doctrine of sovereignty. Now let us look to the developments subsequently, and we come to 1980s and 1990s till date. What we see? We find that a new term and a new system has been inaugurated called globalization. Now this is, as a term, is not new, but as a system somewhat novel. If we mean by globalization that the whole globe or the world is shrinking, and what happens in one part of the globe affects another part of the globe, then we call it globalization. I say that it is not that new term because there was globalization in terms of cultural exchanges, tourism, travels, and even trade and commerce, even in the ancient period. But what is new with this late 20th century development in global communication is the wonderful and the great changes in telecommunication, technological innovation in the field of communication. It has been developing at a very fast speed since the 1960s. With the result, now we find that a simple click in the mouse in New York will immediately begin to have its topsy-turvy development in the share market of Tokyo and Singapore. And this is the great change which has killed distances and which has brought in some unprecedented, unimaginable relations among nations and also some developments within nations. And this is what is called globalization. I think, to be more precise, this latest stage of globalization should be called world financial globalization, because what really matters in the name of globalization is the dominance of finance capital and investment capital throughout the world. And secondly, as a consequence, a new thing has happened, that is the emergence of a global market. So, two factors. One is unprecedented development in communication technology, and secondly, free mobility of labor and capital across national borders. So in this context, we have to examine what has happened to the theory of sovereignty, or to be again more precise, what has happened to state sovereignty, sovereignty of the state. To start with, I think one can point out David Held's publication in 1989 in Political Science titled Political Theory and the Modern State. In this book, David Held has identified 5 fields in which the concept of state sovereignty has undergone some revision in the global context. 1. Economic activities and international economic institutions. 2. Multinational political and military organizations. 3. Regional organizations in international politics. 4. International law as a subject. And 5. Domestic autonomy of the nations. The last thing, which is very much apparently well connected with the theme of sovereignty, state sovereignty. What has happened to autonomy of the nation states? In this broader development, unprecedented changes in human history, so to say, really the new actors who were not there before are the multinational corporate bodies. There were companies. Suppose, even from history I can give one example. What was East India Company? It was a company, private company registered in England, in London, doing business across 7 seas and doing business in India. Similarly, there was another company, East Asian Trading Companies. The Dutch, the French, and the British, they all had that then companies in this way, multinational, multicultural situations. So that was one type of things. But today the speciality, this development is that market is now becoming single practically, global market. So the capitalists are to decide on their investment policies in reference to the demand and supplies in the total global market, and that creates certain difficulties to the old concept of national sovereignty. Because of many developments, particularly in the field as David had given is number 1, economic activities and international economic institutions. You know, as a student of history, recent history, that immediately after Second World War, 2 major international economic institutions were created. One is World Bank, another is International Monetary Fund. They had different purposes. World Bank will give, just as a bank, giving loans to the war affected countries on a banking principle, international banking. So that was the concept they started with. International Monetary Fund, to start with, had the function of trying to establish economic or financial stability throughout the world by giving aid and other things. But in course of time, within 2 decades, we find this separation of roles of World Bank and IMF, they are practically in blood. Today, banking function is done by the IMF, aid giving functions is done by the World Bank. So anyway, international monetary or economic institutions, they have arrived, and also in recent times we have got Asian Development Bank, also multinational on a globalized pattern, but specifically with a focus on Asia. So in this way there are so many things that we find which has come to affect national sovereignty concept. They are practically now challenging the national governments on the question of policy decisions. And from that point arises the real pertinent question in regard to this topic: how much independent are independent national states? Are the independent sovereign national states really remain independent and sovereign nationally and internationally? The first day we discussed preliminary when it started that internal sovereignty and external sovereignty, international sovereignty. Now in both fields question mark has been raised thanks to the globalization context. So this is the main thing we had to discuss today.
Sir, then is sovereignty and globalization contradictory, or is it complementary? Is it globalization is shaping sovereignty as a concept?
No, they are not contradictory as such, but a situation has arisen in which the old concept of sovereignty, state sovereignty, cannot remain as it is. It is going to be severely affected.
Yes.
Now even the national states, national sovereign powers, they have also come to feel that it is really foolish and idiotic to stick to the old concept of state sovereignty, because the world has become interdependent. So national governments have not been obliterated. They remain, they constitute. Force of nationalism may be a little weaker, but it is still there. So feeling of nationalism is not absent. But it is difficult for any national government to claim that I am the supreme decision maker.
That's because of global capitalism. I mean, global capitalism has some role to play.
Invasion. It's invasion into the
Invasion.
field of economics, finance, and investment. But today, if the situation has changed to such an extent that simply the national government, sovereign governments are helpless. For example, satellite communication. How can a sovereign state check it? Not possible at all. So, in fact, the fall of Soviet Union was not caused by one factor. It is multi-factor combination that brought in the downfall of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet young generation, they practically revolted in 1989, fall of Berlin Wall and all these things, etc. Because the satellite information channels, they showed all sorts of high-level living, lavish pattern of lifestyle, etc., employment opportunities, which attracted the younger generation who had no, not only direct experience does not question arise, but even memory is very fade. What happened in 1917? Who cares for it now? After 70 years. So they were very eager to break down the Iron Curtain. That is the pressing problem from within USSR. So Gorbachev said it would be the best policy for the Russians to welcome this opportunity. He is condemned by the orthodox communist, but Gorbachev had a quite free mind, open mind. He said, what cannot be resisted should be accommodated, and we can derive benefit from it also. So that is globalization's impetus, which the national governments are feeling, and now it is a fact, even in economic analysis, it is a fact that globalization cannot be reversed now. But still state sovereignties are not that helpless. Each nation has to decide on its own how much of advantage we can take out of it. The globalization is to stay, it has come to stay. What should be the custom duty to be proposed by the finance minister of India in his annual budget? Is it a decision of the finance ministry or cabinet or Indian parliament? Answer is no. No, because of the fact that India has already been a signatory to another worldwide economic institution, World Trade Organization, which is a successor body of post-World War organization called General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT. Its successor is WTO. So if a country signs it, enters into WTO, it can decide on its own how much of export duty, how much of import duty, on what time things, at what rate. And you will be surprised to know that post-USSR Russia, they till very recently refused to enter WTO. But only in the last week Russia has signed. Early August 2012, Russia now has entered WTO. Because over the years Russia has found that it is more paying to be within WTO rather than staying outside WTO. So all nations, big and small, gradually are feeling that it is perhaps advantageous for them to enter the WTO and then within the WTO go on bargaining, which the developing countries have doing practically in collaboration with China on the one hand and Brazil, South Africa, India. So they are combined together. So how much benefit one can get out of WTO negotiations and bargaining? Tremendous bargaining is going on every time. There is a technical term, so Doha round of talks, this round of talks, Mexico round of talks. Anyway, so many rounds of talks, all aimed at each nation is trying to get the maximum benefit of it. The original main point is that the age-long domination of the Western Europe and USA cannot be acceptable to the whole world now because of the globalization. and the globalized institutions which has come to. World Bank, IMF, Asian Development Bank, WTO, they are all going on. And more regional cooperation organizations also are coming up. So this has created a situation of globalization which, I again repeat, which is overall an international global financial capitalism. But the whole world is following capitalism, but Russia long ago, China also now.
Yes.
And if we look at the Indian politics now, the only major theme is how to serve international capitalism. So anyway, we find this is a situation in which the question of state sovereignty is to be considered, its status. So if somebody argue that no, this is bad, our sovereignty is being infringed, those who will argue on this line on this day, today, they are, I should say, mistaken. They can't comprehend the implications of the changes which cannot be reversed in anymore by any single nation. This is the state of affairs. So what is the real meaning of national sovereignty now? What remains of national sovereignty? I think that this question has to be answered in terms of, if we go back a little, not much, little back to the days of the Cold War. So long there was Cold War, that is, all basic world issues are being considered in the perspective of two major power competition in international politics. But today it is almost, I shouldn't say totally, but almost unipolar.
Yeah.
Now in that sense, during the Cold War, there was two major power blocks which emerged. Now I am coming to political side, not economic more. There was first, immediately after the Second World War, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO was formed by United States and West European powers. And immediately within a year or so, Soviet Union took the lead to form Warsaw Pact. That is Soviet Union as the leader and the East European countries. And now both found it militarily and politically convenient and demanding to take joint actions. Joint actions in terms of military maneuvers, joint action in terms of containment of Soviet Union, from Soviet Union's point of view, how to break that containment of the capitalist, and thirdly, even the foreign policies of these member states, they are not irrelevant, but they must come to terms with this membership of NATO or Warsaw. So compromise on foreign policy or devising a common foreign policy as far as possible. So this is the recent past, Cold War past, in which the globalized context, that is also a globalized context, state sovereignty's position is like this. But first in 1956 in Hungary and 1968 in Czechoslovakia, something happened. Within the Warsaw Pact, there was more or less an convention or agreement that until a joint policy in regard to military maneuver or political movements, political initiative, every nation state has got the right to be consulted. Only after consultation, if a joint policy emerges, then we jointly will follow the policy. But when internal political developments in Hungary and internal political in 56 and internal political developments within Czechoslovakia, their own internal political developments. When these political developments in Hungary in 56 and Czechoslovakia in 1968 was not found acceptable to USSR, USSR without consulting anybody ordered his army to march on to Hungary in 56 and he ordered his tanks to march into the interior of Czechoslovakia on his own order No consultation, no intimation, nothing of the sort. Now Hungary was debated this way, that way, internationally. But what happened in Czechoslovakia? Not only the army marched, tanks went on there, but it began perpetrating the inhuman actions. That is, small children just walking at the tanks going on, they were killed, summarily killed. When students were going to school, summarily killed, just on the suspicion of the particular soldier. There was no uniform command or nothing of the sort. Enter Czechoslovakia and kill everybody who were on the streets. So that gave some sort of a national resistance. What is this? Warsaw Pact should have been a pact for solidarity among the member states, and now USSR is perpetrating these things, violating entirely the sovereignty of Czechoslovakia. And that resistance came to be known as Prague Spring. So from political resistance to came cultural resistance also. The Czech artists, literators, poets, students, everybody opposed this move. Now at that time, I say in so many words because to point out, at that time when international press began criticizing, then the then Soviet ruler, chief, Brezhnev, party chief, he said, no, we have not violated sovereignty. Sovereignty today, that means 1968, he meant sovereignty is today, quote unquote, limited sovereignty. This is the term he used, and immediately it began currency in the name of Brezhnev doctrine of sovereignty. That means, yes, national sovereignty is there, but in some cases, that national sovereignty by nature is to be limited. So we are perfectly on legal side. He said, not invasion of Czechoslovakia, but to say our army marched into Czechoslovakia to help the government of Czechoslovakia, to help the state of Czechoslovakia, to defend the sovereignty of Czechoslovakia. What a twist of language. Anyway, subsequently this Brezhnev doctrine was not internationally accepted. It was condemned. And later on, when Cold War ended, there was glasnost and perestroika. Even the people of the USSR condemned the actions of 1968. So this shows the what happens. Similarly, at some time in the 70s, Britain ordered, the government of Britain, Prime Minister Thatcher, simply ordered in the colonial 19th century fashion its navy to go and attack Falkland, to occupy island of Falkland. That was done, whole world was seeing. So what is the national sovereignty? No, in that case there is no question of national sovereignty. Our navy will go and capture the island because we think it is our island. So it all shows that national sovereignty matters according to the situation, not as a principle, not as a theory or etc. So from this situation, we come now to the last decade of the 20th century or first decade of the 21st century. The time we are living in. Look at what has very recently happened in Greece, economic crisis, and Spain, the economic crisis. Now their economic system, financial system were practically broken down, collapsing. So by this time they were members of another international organization called European Union. Very vigorous demand came from the Greek people that let us then come out of the European Union. If we are in such economic distress, then what's the use of remaining in the European Union and observing the norms, economic norms of banking as set by the European Union? So it sent a message of alarm. And immediately the European Union sat together, took the decision to come to the help of Greece, to restore its currency value, to restore the price, stabilize the prices, and they found a solution through general election. There was an election, and immediately within a month there was another general election to decide giving the full option to the Greek people whether you want to stay in European Union or not. Because European Union will help you provided the Greek people, democratically elected Greek government, they say that yes, we will cooperate. That cooperation will entitle you to health and stability. So somehow Greek electorate said yes, we want to be stable, we want to remain within European Union. Something like this also, not so severe form, but something like this in Spain is still going on. That what will happen to stabilization of price level, unthinkable price rise, etc., etc. So again, Germany, France, and other major leaders of European Union, they have taken a decision that we have to help give aid, substantial aid to these countries to tackle, to overcome the difficulties. So this is the advantages of globalization also. So in this situation, the rise of international and regional organizations and groupings, I have already said, European Union. Now they have also, by way of the evolution of the European Union, developments of the European Union, is they have created a new institution called European Parliament. Is as good a parliament as a national parliament because they are directly elected. MPs are directly elected. They take a decision at European Parliament level when these decisions are to be followed and accepted and worked upon by the nations, member nations of the European Union, and not only domestic but also foreign policy matters. So this shows the impact of globalization in our country. And just may I just conclude in 2 minutes time that in conclusion we can say that sovereignty still is nominally the de jure and de facto etc. are there, but gradually a philosophical vision of development is coming out, fructification of Immanuel Kant, two philosophers, German philosopher Immanuel Kant's vision of perpetual peace and some sort of a world government, and in our country Sri Aurobindo's vision that someday there will be a world organization which will facilitate human unity. In his ideal of human unity, Aurobindo said like this. Now developments are taking us to that end. So national sovereignty is not dead, but national sovereignty had to adjust, and it has already to a large extent adjusted itself with globalization and its effects.